Happy Monday, everyone. I am so excited to be back. I know it's been a few weeks since we've had a live, but we are here and I'm super psyched to be joined by Angelica. So you will have her, she'll be joining here in just a second, but just a quick reminder for y'all, these chats are always saved to IGTV after our chat so you can watch them and share them with people along the way. So welcome, welcome. I hope you are all having a great Monday. Our Instagram live chat is kind of our goal to bridge the world of art education and the world of art. And as you may have been following along through the weeks and weeks that we've been doing IG Live, it's a fun way for us to showcase amazing artists, creatives, and educators. So I am your host, Sarah Krajewski. We will get Angelica in here in just a short moment, but just a friendly reminder for you that you are always welcome to type in the chat if you have any questions or comments along the way. We love these interactions. And then at the very end of our chat today, I will be asking you a trivia question to try to get your hands on one of these super amazing stickers. So I see Angelica is here and we are going to get started in just a second. And if you haven't had a chance to check out her work already, you're going to want to because it's amazing. Let's give her a big warm welcome once she gets in here. There we go. Hi, Angelica.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, friend?
I'm good.
Good. I love your setup. I was like, we got to see all the artwork too because it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I made sure to have it all here for us. So
You nailed it. You nailed it. Well, welcome and happy Indigenous Peoples Day. We're super excited to have you here. So I'm just going to have you start by introducing yourself. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and give us a little bit of your background.
yeah, definitely. So my name is Angelica Yanu. I am a mixed Oglála Lakἱóta artist. I work mostly in monotype, but I also bridge together different mediums, so sculpture, print, film, and site-specific projects. I'm currently living in Oakland right now, the ancestral homeland of the Ohlone people. But yeah, so that's a little background. I can talk more about my process, but...
Well, that's up next. You're like trying to get ahead of yourself. No, just kidding. You're just so excited to share. Well, that's part of what we're going to talk about next because I know it's always fun to see how each artist creates and where their inspiration comes from. And your work is so, so bold and beautiful. And I would love for you to tell us how you make it and then what your inspiration is as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I create oil-based monotype prints that I sometimes turn into paper sculptures. So my process is kind of like a hybrid between oil painting and printmaking. And like I said before, I emphasize experimentation through the merging of mediums. So I really like to push the boundaries of what print can be and look like. So yeah, while pushing these boundaries, I also try and bridge together contemporary Indigenous perspectives with traditional perspectives. And that also falls in line with how I make my work. So I guess the backbone of my process is monotype, but I utilize a lot of different things, a lot of creative and experimental motions within my work.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my main tool I use, my main paintbrush is actually mat board. So I use recycled materials to make my marks. So I use just the edge of my mat board and I scrape away ink and I send it through a big cylinder press. And yeah, so I often turn those prints into sculptures as well. So one of my bigger projects where I did my first site-specific project was called Ayesca, and I actually took my prints to my ancestral homelands. My family is from South Dakota, so our mountainscapes up there are very important to us. So yeah, I took a big roll of prints out there and spent a whole just sculpting with the landscape, and I documented that whole process as well. So yeah, that's kind of the site-specific part of my work. But yeah, I'm really interested in sort of embodying a resistance within, I guess, working within these sacred spaces, sacred geography. Yeah, and specific. Yeah, go.
Oh, I mean, I could just listen to you talk about your process forever
Yeah.
too, but I know I'm excited to hear about how, so thank you for that, because that's actually like a really great transition as far as what I'll be sharing after our chat too. There is a really beautiful, like, kind of short film that you created about your process, exactly what you were talking about. Some of the creative sort of behind the scenes, but then like you in your homeland making these beautiful sculptures, sort of like placing them gently within the land, and then kind of just letting them be what they are. And I feel like that short clip and that video was a really good introduction to who you are as an artist, because you have these like beautiful spanning landscapes of what the mountains look like and what those ridges are. So I would love for you to share with us kind of how I mean, I'm interested in the process to itself. Like, how come you're picking yellow? Is there any type of printmaking that you're doing where you're repeating something, or is it always a mono print? Like, how did that kind of come to be?
Yeah, so I guess I can start with my use of sacred color and sacred shapes. So I have a very strict palette. I only use yellow, red, white, and black, and those are four sacred colors to the Oglála. And then the circular shape is it. I guess it represents a lot of different ideas, a lot of our stories, I guess. But I guess it kind of, for me, represents this idea that we're all interconnected, this sort of like circular formation. It's sort of, I don't know, it's a consistent leading line across our Lakota ceremonies, our dance as well, and our ways of relating with the world, just the idea that we're all interconnected. Yeah, so, and it's, you know, the shape of our big drums and our powwows. So there's a lot of, it's seen a lot and repeated a lot throughout our generations. So yeah, I guess that kind of is a deeper into like my worldview, my Lakota worldview. And yeah, I only do monotypes, so I never actually make additions. So I'm not a traditional printmaker in the sense where I don't produce a lot of the same work. Each print is unique, and it takes a long time to make each print. It takes me about like an hour. So it's a very meditative, slow process that has really helped me feel a sense of connection. And yeah, it's been something that's been really healing for me. So this idea of like healing through art has been the leading line in my work as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I know there's some other video content we'll be sharing too, that where you're kind of talking about how that can be sort of a therapeutic practice for you, and using that as a way to sort of work through how you're feeling, and what does that feel like to express that too.
Yeah.
And I think there's something special to the fact that though it is a print, it is unique, right? It's something you'll never see again, just like the landscape too. It's never going to be something that repeats and happens over and over again. So I love that you only ever create mono prints. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I guess it does kind of pertain to that idea of like impermanence too. So it's,
yeah. Did you share with us yet what the specific like color meaning is behind the sacred colors of using yellow and red in addition to black and white? Or is it just...
I mean, it really depends. A lot of our oral narratives utilize those colors in different ways, like the represent a new start or a birth of a sense, or a new world. And yeah, there's so many different interpretations. So there's such a diverse when you look at the colors, and I feel like every elder or peer that I've talked to has a different relationship to the color. Me, the yellow it's just been something that I mean, I just love the color yellow in general, but yeah, I think that I've seen in a lot of writings, like contemporary Indigenous poets talk about color, and color yellow has been something that I've seen talked about a lot. specifically within my sister's work. She's a poet, and yeah, I don't know. I have this really deep connection to it, and it's so different for everybody. But
That's awesome.
I think having such a strict palette, I'm really paying homage to my ancestors, and it gives me a sense of integrity too. And yeah, I just don't stray away from that, and maybe one day I will, but it feels very
That's the
important
key.
to
Absolutely.
strict palette. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I mean, it kind of resonates with the title of our chat today, you know, of between two worlds, right? Sort of bridging that a little bit and finding your voice between kind of your story a bit, which brings me to the next point of how do you feel like you're kind of moving into the contemporary art world a little bit as opposed to maybe a more traditional art style from your community? Do you feel like how was that process a little bit for you?
Yeah, it's been a long process of finding my between those two worlds. But yeah, I guess my style, there isn't really a clear and direct link to traditional like Lakota painting per se. But I am interested in using a subtlety, like a subtle approach within my work when it comes to incorporating like traditional stories within my work. So I try and explore these traditions in a very like layered way. So I remain sort of respectful to my ancestors. But the way that I do that is I more recently have been using our traditional deer hide, so deer skin that I got from South Dakota back in March when I was there last. So sourcing these materials from my directly and then printing on them has helped me kind of bridge those two worlds. But yeah, also I'm doing it in a way where I'm not being exploitative of our or over explaining stories. So that subtlety, I feel like it protects us, or it protects our, but also allows us to share them. And then that kind of leads into like I more recently have been thinking about audience and how do I reach a broad range of people. And I think since my work is so abstract and otherworldly, it's more accessible to people who aren't even from maybe an indigenous background. I think that, yeah, people can recognize something in it that they feel connected to. I think as humans, we're all connected to the landscape in one way or another, indigenous or not. So, yeah, I think that's kind of how I've been trying to bridge the two worlds together, but it's definitely a lifelong process of, yeah, I feel like it's going to fluctuate and it's going to change in many different ways. But yeah, the use of sacred materials like deer and buffalo hide and color and numerical additions to in Lakota, we actually use numbers. Numbers are sacred in a lot of our regalia. Like we wear 28 feathers. Like the number 28 is a reoccurring number that's sacred to us. It's seen in our beadwork designs, like traditional beadwork. It's also seen, our medicine wheel is made up of 28 lines. And we, as the Lakota, we believe that there are 28 things that were given to us by our great spirit. And it also pertains to our hands as well. There's a story around the 28 spaces on our hands, 28 different sacred spaces. So we believe our hands are sacred. So it kind of falls in a lot of different categories. But yeah, no, it's something I'm still trying to suss out and kind of figure out, but I'm excited to use sacred numerology in my work in my future projects.
Yeah, thank you, Angelica, for giving us that whole background. I know there's so much content there and so much that's important to you and to your people. So I think that's really a beautiful way to bridge it all together through your art. And I love too, that kind of brings us to our next conversation. I know it can be tricky to tie it into the classroom a little bit as far as, you know, bringing this inspiration from Indigenous peoples, but also how do we then introduce our students to that without becoming, you know, to like to work on any cultural appropriation, right? We want to avoid that so that we can instead show our students many different kinds of art, but then give them the ability to find what works and what they know about their own culture, right? So
Right.
I have sort of two questions, but we'll start with the first one. Can you tell us what your experience was like in art or with art as a young individual? Because as art teachers, that's something we're really passionate about. We want to make sure all of our kids have experience with that. But then we'll piggyback off that a little bit and help us figure out how we can work to have an appropriate conversation with our students about all types of artwork.
Yeah, definitely. I guess to start with my experience with art growing up, it was actually one of the only things that really saved my life. And it's funny because I was watching a video about another artist who just talked about how art really just uplifted her and made her feel reconnected. So yeah, as a child, like art, you know, I went to a lot of Waldorf schools. Art was central education as a kid, and I was really thankful to have that upbringing. But yeah, it definitely gave me a sense of connection. And I think that giving kids in classrooms these tools from creativity is such an easy way for them to grapple with a sense of belonging. I think as kids trying to figure out who we are in this world,
Yep.
art is such a tool to start that conversation with themselves. And especially for mixed and indigenous children like myself, I always sort of felt, you know, in between and very, maybe not as grounded. So I think that art really helped bridge that gap for me and made me feel really grounded in myself. And yeah, I think it also teaching kids different mediums and different perspectives helps them feel less constricted to one box. And I think that can help them understand their own identity as being more fluid, and you don't have to fit in one box, or you don't have to use one bridge a bunch of mediums together. And yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, but art really, it saved me in a lot of ways. It really helped me grow and be confident in myself. And I'm seeing that in a lot of kids, you know, in art classes.
I love that. I know I always get so excited and I'm like, can you answer these 3 questions in a row? And then it's like, okay, I can't actually feasibly do that. So that is a beautiful response. I love it. And honestly, as you were chatting, I was typing down a couple little notes about things, and I love how you talked about belonging and feeling grounded, and then finding a sense of identity, but knowing that it's a fluid identity, because again, you're not just one thing. Like, I'm not an art teacher exclusively and that's it, right? There's so much more to your identity, which is completely the same for students. So I really like how you're mentioning, just like in general, our job as art educators, but as artists and as people, is to show how many ways you can feel safe to belong and feel like you can be grounded in humanity. So thank you for bringing up that way to explain it too. I think that's perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just so important to emphasize that, especially when teaching new forms of art to kids, letting them have the ability to freeform and, you know, approach materials in ways they might not.
Yes.
That's how I came to make the work that I make now, was just through experimentation. I took a monotype printmaking class in my undergrad, I think like sophomore year, and I was a photography student at that point. And yeah, the class was experimental printmaking, and they were like, just find found objects, make some marks with it. And yeah, I just picked up a piece of mat board and have not put it down since then. So, and it's just so cool. Like, people never really, when I explain my process or when people see my process, they're usually pretty like shocked, because it just looks so simple. Like it's a piece of, I'm scraping away, but I get these really great variation lines and yeah, just really uplifting kids to like literally just mess around in the class.
Yeah.
Really important.
Absolutely. I'm picturing the students whenever I introduce, you know, a lesson or a concept, they are just like itching to try to touch the materials, right? I just want to see what this paint is, or I want to see what the clay is. They just like have to see it. And so giving them that space and that time to just, okay, we're going to do 3 minutes of literal play. Do what you want to do with the stuff, and then we'll talk about the techniques, or maybe, you know, give them that play time at the end, because that experimentation, you're right, is where we learn and where we find our voice. So thank you for that reminder as well. Couple quick process questions, because as you were talking, I of course thought of many more. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we can avoid cultural appropriation when introducing different kinds of artists, because I know that's a very important topic for us to discuss today. But as far as your mat board goes, I'm seeing these beautiful images come to life in your process. Do you do anything in particular to make your mat board have like worn edges? Do you reuse your mat board? Like, what does the specifics of your process look like? Because it's like, you're right. It looks like, oh, okay, it's a scrape, but it's clearly so much more than that.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. Where to even start? So, I use mat board that I get from the recycling bins at frame shops.
Yes.
So I am that annoying artist going into every little frame shop in the city and asking to dig through the recycling. And so I don't actually, I don't mess with the mat board at all. So I don't cut it or make it more worn. I literally just take it right out of the trash and use it.
Nice.
And I've noticed that each board has has a different tooth to it, or the way that it was cut. So it's really out of my hands, and I kind of like that part of the process. I'm just, I'm just recycling materials. And yeah, it's funny. I create a funny relationship with my local framer, because I brought in some prints to get framed for an exhibition that I had here in Oakland. And it's just a full circle, because that's their mat board to make the work, and then I'm bringing it to them to have them frame it. So that's another circle thing. But yeah, and then sometimes I'll use the same piece of mat board over and over, and that it tends to, get really, it'll fall apart over time. Yeah, no, it's just really experimental, I guess.
I love it.
Yeah, and I do modify the oil paint and make it more loose, so it's easier to take away, and I think that helps me get more like fine lines.
Sure.
Yeah, and then it's all about pressure too. So it's really about the angle and the pressure of the mat board. So you can get such a wide, like diverse lines with just mat board.
It's amazing. I could watch you create things all day. It's just like the process is so engaging. Well, thank you for sharing that behind the scenes. And honestly, I love too that it's this recycled process, right? And that circle even more so comes to life with like bringing the painting back and bringing the print back. That's beautiful.
It ties in with, just taking care of our environment too, and recycling and reusing materials.
Absolutely. Yeah. Basically, till it disintegrates, till it becomes nothing, right? To be able to use. I think that's wonderful, and also tells a story too that relates to your work.
Yeah, and it definitely is. It relates to like our Lakota worldview too, of just taking care of our space, that we're all interconnected, and that there isn't any hierarchies. Like we should treat our environment, we would treat our bodies, and yeah, so it all kind of ties into that Lakota worldview.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So I guess part of, I'm thinking from the perspective of an art educator, I would love to introduce more Indigenous artists, and just love including diverse artists. So students are seeing so many different ways to create work, both how people are inspired, but then what the final result is and what their process is and where they're getting their inspiration from. But as you know, it can be a conversation. You have to think about it to make sure you're being appropriate with what kind of projects you're doing for your students, and making sure that we're really showing respect to how artists create things and where their body of work sort of lies. So I'm interested if you have any thoughts or suggestions on how artists can use, or sorry, how teachers can use your artwork to inspire students, or how do we go about being respectful to introduce artists and not appropriate?
Yes, I honestly think that if the correct language is taken around speaking about the process of the artist, but now that I'm really thinking about it, I think actually inviting these Indigenous artists, the spaces into the institutions physically and having directly talking to the students, I think that's, it's not always doable, but I think that is the best way for educators to just, make sure that there isn't misuse or disrespect, because it's hard to talk about an artist's, deep identity of their place without them there, I think.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of Indigenous artists that I know and respect, we all kind of work from really, really intimate, deep places. So it's really hard to, it's a fine line to walk, and I wish I had like maybe a better, clearer answer for that. But I think just inviting, these Indigenous artists into the institutions and having them host the conversations is part of being a good ally. I think it's just having that direct connection between the students and that artist is really good, even if it's like a Zoom call. But yeah, just having them in those spaces physically is probably the best way.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think like when you're asking questions and you can directly ask the source, that's when it's going to be the most meaningful. That's when it's going to be the most authentic answer, right? And trying to make sure that we're giving our students a true meaning instead of making up something, or whatever it might be, or not knowing the answer to share to a question. It's really important to find that source too. So thank you for giving us that suggestion as well. And knowing, on behalf of all art educators, it's okay to say you don't know something, right? It's absolutely okay.
Yeah. The second part I was going to add was just keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Which I think, I mean, it's really cool to see you have this platform in the way that you're utilizing it. I think is a really great start. Just hosting the conversations is really important.
Right, exactly. And sort of building those connections between what we don't know or what we do know, and how we can continue to learn more too. And also, something that I'm even just thinking about now is in my teaching, part of I think what helps is remembering that things are not a thing of the past, right? But everything is current still. Like, you are a current working living artist, Angelica, and you are you are a modern individual who is making things inspired by your work and your heritage. And I think that's something that sometimes gets lost, perhaps, is that we're occasionally pulling from history but not pulling from modern world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and just broadening the scope of what art can look like. It's not always work, it's not always regalia, it's this too, and it's just broadening that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a question here too in the chat, asking about if there's a video. Well, first of all, this video in particular of us chatting today will be saved to IGTV on the Art of Ed, so you can watch it and share it as many times as you'd like. But of course, giving Angelica a follow and finding other Indigenous artists or diverse artists that you can find their stories and share them with your students will help you have a greater breadth of creators for sure. And after the chat today too, I will go ahead and link to some of the video content that Angelica has created, so that if you'd like to learn a little bit more about her process, you can follow along after that. Sometimes it just takes a little digging, and if you can't arrange a Zoom call with an amazing artist like you, then sometimes it's maybe just doing a little research yourself, as if they were there. What might they say, or is there something that already exists that you can show your students instead of doing, explaining it yourself as the artist? Can you have the actual person say the things?
Doing the research too.
Exactly.
That's totally acceptable as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we kind of talked about this too, but I just am looking for your perspective. Do you feel like it is appropriate for art teachers to use your creation as an inspiration for the classroom? Is it something where it probably, maybe I'm answering my own question, but like it might change from artist to artist as far as like asking, right? And saying, is it okay that we use you as an inspiration within our classroom? Can we create our own versions inspired by your work? How do you feel about what that looks like when bringing it into the world of art education?
Yeah, I think personally, speaking for myself, I am so happy to share my work, and I would be really happy for someone to share it with students. And yeah, I think actually just that gesture of sharing the work goes a long way, and that's a respect in itself. So yeah, no, I feel very comfortable with that. I think that just going back on what we said about experimenting and teaching
Yes.
experimental approaches to art making. I think my work is a good example of that for kids to maybe tap into. So yeah, but I think it does change from artist to artist, but I think most artists are pretty open with that, and it's just about the language and the way that it's cared for, and just to not place in the past, like we've said before. But yeah, no, I think that that's acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that too. And I know, like you said, it's most important to just ask, right? Just ask the artist. Ask. Is it okay if our students make work inspired by yours? I mean, again, we have these conversations with students all the time. This artist created something, and how might you interpret it differently? Or how, I live in Wisconsin, so there's no way that our landscape looks the same as yours, right? And that's why we're pulling from maybe an idea or an inspiration, and then turning it into something where we can question our own identity and our own connection to a landscape or whatever it might be, to get those conversations started.
Yeah, especially since my work is so oriented around like healing through making too.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's an important lesson for all kids and adults even too, to be tapped into. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I want to just play now in printmaking. Like, you've gotten me inspired to just go experiment and play, because sometimes just feel like you don't have time, but there's just no wrong way to do it. And that's the whole point.
Yeah, you have to play. Sometimes you just have to sit down and play, even if you're 30 years old. Like it's important in art making, especially even in the fine art world. Like, I feel like there's such a funny thing about processes being so, I don't know, prestigious, or it's just like
Yes, yeah.
sit down and play, and yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes when the best things happen is when you're the most free, and there's not this pressure of needing to produce something that's so refined or whatever it might be. Yeah. I'm looking at the two pieces behind you. I would love if you are interested in sharing just a little more detail about those two pieces in particular, and then we'll wrap it up with kind of our trivia question and some words of encouragement moving forward.
Definitely. Actually, I brought one of my sculptures.
Yes, please.
I have one of my Angelicas Sculpture shadow boxes.
Gorgeous. I love the peak of the yellow too.
Right? So this piece was made in 2018. The sculpture was actually made in the Black Hills, or Hesapa. And I took a piece of it and put it in this beautiful shadow box. But this is a good example of one of my site-specific sculptures. So yeah, it has a lot of meaning to me. It's definitely a deep tie to ancestral space and deep time in history. So yeah,
It's beautiful.
me some larger works that I made this past year. This piece is called You Look to See What the Light Lets In. And that is a title derivative of my sister's poetry. She's also Oglála Lakἱóta, and she talks about color, light, and form a lot in her work. And I was just inspired by one of her poems. Yeah, most of my titles are taken from writings from my family. Even Ayaska was a term that was introduced to me by my great uncle, Charles Trimble. And he sort of defines it as this interpreter between worlds, the spirit world and the here as the human world, maybe. So I just thought it was a really beautiful term, and I felt that it sort of is kind of how I'm trying to utilize my work as the sort of interpreter between two worlds. So yeah, I felt like those two terms were really important to me, and just utilizing language from my family is really important to me. Yeah.
I love that. I think too, it's so fun to hear you talk about how your work is created, because I'm just hearing so much community behind it. I mean, hearing that inspiration is coming from your sister, and your family has a lot to do with it, and your framer has aspects of their creation, you know, their world, their career in your work too. It's really inspiring, and a great reminder that it's never just one person, right?
Yeah.
It just couldn't possibly be. And how much it comes together as a whole group.
Yeah, it's definitely a community effort, and that goes hand in hand with Lakota worldview as well. Like, you know, my family is huge. Like a lot of people that I'm not actually even related to in South Dakota, like I call them my cousin, and you know,
Yeah.
we're blood related, but we're all Lakota. We're all interconnected, and we see each other as family, and that's how we see, you know, the world too, like animals as well. And yeah, it kind of encapsulates that whole worldview.
That's perfect. Thank you. So we'll wrap it up quick with just maybe a little word of encouragement, word of advice for us. I always like to end with just kind of on a positive note about how we can move forward before we do our little trivia question. So we'll get to that in a second. But is there anything you want to share with us personally, artistically, human wise,
Yeah.
as we wrap up our chat today?
Wow. I mean, I guess like we said before, never stop asking questions within your own art and your own process, even as an educator. You know, just keep that conversation going, and yeah, just enjoy it, enjoy
Yes.
doing what you're doing. I think being an educator is such an important role. I think it's undervalued in some ways in our society, Western society, unfortunately, but you guys are mentors. Educators are so important, and just reminding yourself that, you know, even if it gets hard, which I'm sure it does, being a teacher and with children especially, just reminding yourself that you're doing work that is larger than yourself, and you're actually making a huge impact on these kids' lives. I remember every single art teacher I've ever had, and they've all impacted me in so many different ways. So I think just like being kind to yourself too, as a teacher, because that's a hard role to be. And
Yeah.
I understand it too, because as an artist, especially an Indigenous artist, you know, we are educators as well during these times, because yeah, a lot of our teachings have been, you know, pushed under the rug or placed in the past. So I think this generation is doing a lot of really critical hard work right now.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah,
Yes.
just yourself, and yeah, keep teaching, keep going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angelica. I'm hearing you refer to yourself as that interpreter between two worlds, but then I was thinking about it too as you were discussing the fact that, I mean, teachers to some extent are interpreting the art world to make it palatable for even the youngest artists, right? It's never just look and be done, but how do we kind of communicate and create that conversation? So it's kind of fun to think of yourself as an interpreter in some way, either as an artist or as an educator or a creative yourself, and just as a human, and kind of like interpreting meaning behind every individual that you meet. So I love that.
Definitely. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so let's end with a little bit of a trivia question for all y'all that hung with us till the end here. Angelica has been creating work for a while. You can see some of it behind her too, but here's my trivia question for you. And if you get it right and you're the first person to answer, you can DM the Art of Ed, send us a little message with your address and say you won the sticker, and I will pop it in the mail for you so you can have one of your fancy holographic stickers. So the question for today, I'm looking for people to answer in the chat, is what colors does Angelica use in her work? So I'm going to give you the two, black and white. But other than that, what are the only other colors that you have used? Candido, I know you want a shiny sticker. What other colors besides black and white does Angelica use in her work? Feel free to type it in the chat. And then, okay, Laura B. creatively. Yellow, I'm going to give it to Play Purpose Art because you got them all. So Play Purpose Art, black, white, red, yellow, beautiful. You may send the Art of Ed a little message and I will send you a sticker. I'm writing it down just in case I don't hear from you. Perfect. Angelica, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. We will be saving this conversation to IGTV so you can share it to all your friends after this, and then feel free to check out her website, and we'll be sharing a bunch more content too. Where else can they find you and find your work that you need to share?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, so I'm most active on my Instagram, Angelica Yanu, and my website as well, which is www.angeltrimbleyanu.com. And those are my most like well-used platforms. So
Perfect.
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, but if you're in the area, I do have an exhibition up currently in person. You can go see it. It's at the Gray Loft Gallery in downtown Oakland. So if
excellent.
Area, they're open every Friday and Saturday from 1 to 5. So
beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I will, like I said, in the story for the Art of Ed, I'll be sharing a bunch more about Angelica's work so that you can follow along and see her process as she continues as an artist. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday, and we'll chat later, okay?
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.